In this movie, I'm going to talk a little bit about look development and shading. Here we have our good old simple guy, and he now has a shirt and pants on. He's textured, which means the UVs are all laid out, and I applied a texture to the shader. And of course, this viewport representation is some indication of what you'll get when you render it, but it's not a good indication, so you want to test render. We are using Arnold as our main renderer, and if I take this scene and render it as is, I get a warning: no light in scene. Okay, so I'm going to put a light in my scene. Go to rendering and maybe a directional light. Of course, it doesn't matter where it is, but it helps to put it somewhere so we know where it's pointing. Let's see what this looks like. Go back to Arnold and hit render. We get something. It's not quite bright enough. Let's make him twice as bright. 3 times as bright. There we go. We need to re-render. That's a good start, but you've still got really dark areas behind it. And also he has got subsurface scattering in his shader, and you can't really judge that with just a single light. So basically, to do some look development, we want to put a 3-point lighting on the fella. So we can use this as our key light. I'm just going to call this key in the transform node. I'm going to add a little spotlight, which we can place on the other side of him. We want to rotate it and pull it back quite a bit, maybe a little bit up. So how do we know what we're aiming at? Let's go to panels, look through selected, and this is what the spotlight is seeing. So we can now, just as we would navigate a normal camera, make it so that it exactly fits the character. Switch back to our perspective. And let's turn on the lights in this scene. It looks fine for the spotlight. So let's go to Arnold and render this, and we don't really see any spotlight because, as you all know, in Arnold all lights are quadratic. So we'll have to push it way up, probably even more. That's a bit too much, so somewhere a little bit below that. And it's automatically updating, so I can just squeeze it in. So now there's no longer this black side, which really helps when we're doing look development. The other thing we really want to do is put another spotlight in, and I can just duplicate this spotlight to be lazy and go to my look through selected and throw this one in from the back. So we have a little backlight. We can give some color, but in look development, you don't want to give your lights too much color because you want to have a neutral lighting while you are doing your look development. Go back to perspective and let's render this one. We don't see too much of the backlight. How do we know what the backlight is doing? Well, we can always hit this little button over here that renders just the selected light. That's really not very much, is it? So backlights are usually, whoa, that suddenly is a lot. Okay, that was way too bright because I had pushed my exposure up to 5, which should of course be just on 0. Something that happens sometimes. So we're back. My character, he has a separate viewport shader and a separate Arnold shader, so I have to go into the shading group, find my Arnold shader, and play with the subsurface scale. It used to be 0.1, which is a bit too much. If you put it on 0.001, it gets to be in a sort of the nice range, so it's a really teeny tiny character. Let's make it a little bit more. So now that we've got 3-point lights, you can actually start adjusting parameters. A few more tips on look development. You can, in the viewport, select a part which you want to update. So if I go, let's just render the entire head and say I want to focus just on his face. I'm going to take this part and say I'm just going to focus on his face. And now I can really fine-tune my substep scattering and play with just that part of the shader. So this is a huge subsurface scattering, and this is sort of where we want it to be, a little bit more. So the Arnold render view allows you to just render part of the scene. You see how it's sort of annoying that it gets in the way of your actual viewport. There is another trick. You can switch the viewport renderer to Arnold, and then either the whole viewport will be rendered with the Arnold shader, bloop, there we go, or part of the viewport will be updated with the Arnold renderer. So you can, in your viewport, interactively, and you see it lags a little, focus in on a certain part of your scene and just have that rendered with the Arnold renderer and interactively update your look development. So these are some tips on how to work on the shading on your character. Make sure you have lights in your scene, that they're properly adjusted, and work directly in the Arnold render view or in your viewport.